Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is warning that separatist sentiment in the province is higher than ever and that Ottawa would be wise not to test it. Smith says Alberta has reached a breaking point on key energy demands, including her proposed pipeline to Prince Rupert, and that failure to deliver will only fuel the province's growing independence movement. Meanwhile, Smith's approval rating has hit its highest point since taking office, even as several premiers across the country are seeing double-digit drops. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has released its annual report card, and Alberta is standing out, with Finance Minister Nate Horner earning one of the highest grades in the country, as most provincial finance ministers actually got a failing grade. Alberta is also lifting its U.S. liquor ban, but American products will still face a hefty surtax. And as Canada prepares to host the G7, Alberta Energy is poised to take the spotlight. All that and more on this week's Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Isaac Lamoureux. Let's dive into that first story now. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says that separatist sentiment in the province has reached historic highs and that Ottawa would be making a dangerous mistake by ignoring Alberta's demands. After discussing her previously made demands and the risk the Liberals would face by not working with Alberta on addressing each of them independently, along with building a pipeline, Smith had the following to say. Take a listen.
We know there's huge frustration out there just because the Liberals won.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what the frustration will be if what you have been pitching almost daily, your let's call them the demands, plus the pipeline, does not go through? What is the risk to not having that happen?
Well, I hope the Prime Minister doesn't want to test it because I take it seriously. I have never seen separatist sentiment be as high as it is right now. We've done our own polling and we've seen numbers as high as 37%. You look historically, I don't know if it's ever been that high. But again, I've also seen it dissipate when Ottawa addresses the legitimate concerns Alberta has. And I'm not kidding that the 9 demands are my short list. I know that there are other tensions that we have with the federal government, but a lot can get resolved when you have the means, because people have good paying jobs, and you also have the revenues to be able to address some of the social pressures. So I think that for our sake and for the country's sake, I can't imagine that there will be another project on the national list that will generate as much revenue, as much GDP, as many high-paying jobs as a bitumen pipeline to the coast. So that will be my pitch, and I hope that he is willing to work with us on it. He seems to be giving us the indication that he is, but we'll know for sure in a few more months.
So that's even higher than the 30 to 32% figure Smith referenced earlier this spring, which was also what a May Leger poll found. If you remember, we've been tracking this number on Alberta Roundup all year, and Smith herself has said that she wants separatist sentiment to go down, not up, but as long as Ottawa keeps ignoring Alberta's demands, that number seems to be rising. If the numbers do keep rising, Smith has pledged an Alberta separation referendum in 2026 if enough signatures are gathered. Some are suggesting that the referendum could even take place earlier at the October 2025 municipal elections, especially if the Alberta Prosperity Project gains enough support for its petition by then. So many demands were previously made by Smith of the federal government, and some of them included repealing Bill C-69, the net zero electricity regulations, the oil and gas emissions cap, the net zero vehicle mandates, and much more. Another demand was for the federal government not to impose export taxes or restrictions on Alberta resources and equalization reform. At the heart of Alberta's demand is Smith's proposal for a 1 million barrel per day bitumen pipeline to Prince Rupert, which she pitched to the Prime Minister as part of a broader deal to support Canada's decarbonization efforts. Smith explained that pairing decarbonization investment with a new pipeline is the only viable way to finance these large-scale industrial projects. And we'll remember that there seemed to be a consensus among premiers regarding pipelines following the recent First Minister's meeting, until BC Premier David Eby, who was notably absent from the meeting, threw a spanner in the works. Smith also called on Carney to stop increasing the industrial carbon tax based on the many concerns raised by industry, which of course she has already done in Alberta. Smith has also now tasked a negotiating team, which consists of several ministers, to begin working with Ottawa over the summer. She said, quote, "We're asking for the federal government to put together an equal table, and then we'll go through these one at a time, and hopefully in the fall session we'll be able to make some progress. So we'll see if Ottawa finally moves, or if Alberta's separatist movement continues to grow." So while separatist sentiment is rising, so too is Premier Smith's personal popularity. despite most other premiers seeing a decline. According to an Angus Reid poll released on Thursday, Smith posted the largest approval rating gain of any Canadian premier this quarter, rising 5 points to 51%, her highest mark since taking office in 2022. And this comes just weeks after CBC polling showed that the UCP would cruise to an easy majority if an election were held today, something we covered on a previous show that clearly shows how dominant Smith is in Alberta. However, the Angus Reid survey also found that Alberta is Canada's most polarized province politically, with 32% of Albertans strongly approving of Smith's performance and 37% strongly disapproving. Only Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew posted higher overall approval of 68%, which has been consistent throughout his leadership as he's constantly polled above the other premiers. Only Smith and Kinew have at least 1/3 of residents strongly approving of their performance, and conversely, Smith and Legault are the lone premiers with more than 1/3 of residents strongly disapproving of their performance. Legault recorded actually the sharpest decline of any premier, falling 13 points to just 25% approval rating, his lowest ever on record, which of course followed Quebec's first credit rating decrease from S&P since 1995. Ontario Premier Doug Ford also saw a 10-point decline, dropping to 38% approval following backlash to Ontario's new Bill 5. EB's approval rating also fell 7 points to 46% amid criticism over two controversial bills, Bill 14 and 15, which opposition parties have argued grant the BC NDP sweeping powers at the expense of transparency, environmental oversight, and Indigenous rights. But despite attacks from the legacy media for her diplomatic approach with the United States and President Donald Trump after she traveled to Mar-a-Lago and met with Ben Shapiro, Smith has clearly not suffered after reaching a record high approval rating for herself. Now let's hop into the Canadian Taxpayer Federation's latest Provincial Finance Minister report card. If you guessed that most provinces failed miserably, you'd be right. Alberta Finance Minister Nate Horner earned a solid B grade, which was actually the second highest in the country. The majority of provincial finance ministers got a failing grade, assuming like most schools, you consider a D to be a fail. The CTF praised Alberta for cutting the lowest income tax rate from 10 to 8%, saving a typical two-person working family about $1,500 a year, which earned Horner an A+ in the tax relief section. But Alberta wasn't perfect. Horner's spending growth earned an F, with spending up 8.4% this year, which is the second highest increase in the country. And perhaps most notably, every single province increased its spending this year. Horner got a B in the debt interest payments category, despite having actually the lowest debt interest payments in the country at $598 per person, and a C in debt by borrowing at least $5.2 billion this year, meaning each Albertan owes about $16,684, which again is the second lowest in the country. Nationwide, the only province to do better than Alberta was Saskatchewan, which earned a B+. Nova Scotia and PEI got a C+ and C- respectively. 4 provinces had D or D-, while Newfoundland and Labrador and Manitoba were both stuck with Fs. Notice that how Manitoba was in last place in this taxpayer report card but has the most popular premier? That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Next up, Alberta is lifting its US liquor ban, but with a catch. Albertans can once again buy US-made liquor after the province ended its 3-month ban on American alcohol imports. The Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Commission confirmed that US liquor products are now allowed back in, but a 25% surtax remains on any American liquor shipped after March 4th. US Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, welcomed the news. He said, quote, "Very glad to see that Albertans can once again enjoy a cold US beer or glass of wine. Thanks to Premier Danielle Smith for your leadership in removing this barrier to fair and reciprocal trade." Smith first imposed the ban in March as part of Alberta's response to US tariffs on Canadian goods. At the time, she said, quote, "Until further notice, we just have to drink a bit more BC wine and Alberta craft beer and spirits, and that's just fine with us." But Smith also warned that Alberta would not expand pipeline access to the US while current tariffs remained in place, and that focus hasn't changed. Even with the liquor surtax softened, Alberta's broader strategy remains aimed at building global export capacity, not deeper US reliance. A theme that ties directly back to this week's top story on the proposed pipeline to Prince Rupert. So we'll have to wait and see if this softer tone on liquor signals any broader thaw, or if the province keeps doubling down on new markets overseas. For our last story today, As Canada prepares to host the G7 summit this week in Alberta, which the president is expected to attend, by the way, a new Ipsos poll shows Canada is the most preferred oil supplier among G7 nations. Canada topped the list with 68% of G7 respondents ranking it in their top 3 preferred suppliers, ahead of Norway and the US. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith called it a vote of confidence in Alberta's energy industry, saying, quote, Alberta's government has been relentless in our efforts to promote how our province can provide reliable and sustainably produced energy to our G7 partners and beyond, and I am thrilled to see this message is being heard. Ipsos also found that Canada's favorability as an energy supplier rose, while the US saw a sharp drop, further reinforcing Alberta's strategic push to market its energy globally. As Smith put it this week, the opportunity is massive, but only if Ottawa gets out of the way. She said, quote, now is the time for us to work together to unleash the full potential of Alberta's energy sector and create jobs and prosperity for a generation of people in Alberta and Canada. The federal government should act now to remove production caps and join us in supporting an oil pipeline to the West Coast, increasing access to tidewater and ensuring we can continue to provide Alberta-made energy for our valued partners around the world. With G7 leaders watching from right here in Alberta, that message may carry more weight than ever. That's it for this week's Alberta Roundup. My name's Isaac Lamoureux. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend and God bless.